The day everything fell apart wasn't stormy, nor dramatic. The sun rose just the same, brushing golden light across the window pane as if unaware that inside that courtroom, my life was about to be unmade piece by piece. I walked in with a heart half hopeful, still believing justice had a face, still believing love once shared had a trace of mercy left in it. Nathan, my husband of 9 years, the father of my children, had turned into someone I didn't recognize. Cold, deliberate, and terrifyingly prepared. While I was busy grieving the slow death of our marriage, he was building a case against me, documenting every tear, every moment of exhaustion, every word taken out of context, and filing them neatly into folders presented before the court. He called me unstable, said I was unfit. The house, he kept it. He claimed it was under his name, that he purchased it before we married. The kids, he won custody. He hired the best child psychologist in the city to write a favorable report. My dignity, it was shredded slowly during every cross-examination where I was made to seem irrational, overly emotional, incapable. I didn't even have time to react. I moved into a single-room apartment that smelled of old plaster and cheap detergent. The ceiling had a crack that ran like a scar, and the floor creaked with every step. I had one suitcase, a half-filled journal, and a photo of my children I wasn't sure I was allowed to keep. The silence was the worst part. I wasn't used to sleeping without the sound of little feet tiptoeing down the hallway or the soft knock of a child too afraid of the dark. My arms ached from the absence. Days blurred together. I picked up work wherever I could, waitressing at night, helping at a florist on weekends, and eventually cleaning homes. I felt invisible. No one knew I had once managed marketing campaigns, coordinated ad budgets, or written content seen by thousands. To them, I was just another tired woman with vacant eyes and quick hands. My phone rarely rang. I spent a lot of nights curled up on the floor, not the bed. The floor felt more honest. I cried without sound, the kind of crying that starts in the bones. I kept wondering when someone would knock on my door, tell me it was all a mistake, that someone saw what happened and would help fix it. But no one did. The world doesn't stop for broken women. Eventually, the despair turned into something else, a quiet determination. It didn't roar or come with a motivational speech. It whispered. It reminded me of who I used to be before I gave everything away to make someone else shine. I signed up for a free online course in digital design. The first few lessons felt like learning to walk again, but I kept going. I printed out a schedule and taped it to the fridge with a magnet that said, "You still matter." Weeks turned into months. I made a rule: wake up, make coffee, work, study, sleep, repeat. It was a monotonous rhythm, but inside it, I began to breathe again. I started freelancing, offering design services to small businesses. My first paycheck was barely enough for groceries, but I printed the invoice and hung it on my wall. Proof. Evidence that I still had something to offer. I joined an online community of women rebuilding after divorce. At first, I lurked silently, reading stories that mirrored mine, wondering how so many of us could be broken in the same shape. Eventually, I posted, just a short paragraph. It ended with, "I'm still here." That post changed everything. Messages poured in. Encouragement, advice, stories more harrowing than mine, but ending in triumph. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. One night, I opened my journal and wrote, "He took my kids, he took my house, he tried to take my dignity, but I'm still breathing, and that means he didn't win." That sentence became a mantra. I repeated it every morning. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something to grip when the weight of everything threatened to crush me again. I still had moments of collapse. Days where I saw a child on the street who looked like my daughter and had to duck into an alley to cry. Nights where I wondered if my kids remembered the lullabies I used to hum. But I stopped waiting for rescue. I became my own. It was slow, painfully slow, like growing something out of scorched earth. But each small victory, a new client, a kind comment, a quiet night without tears, was a brick in the road back to myself. I learned to measure success in whispers, not roars. I learned to redefine power not as something loud or aggressive, but as something that survives. Something that rises after being pushed into the dirt. I didn't know then that I was only beginning, that the road ahead would lead me to places of redemption, of confrontation, of reunion. I only knew this. I wasn't done yet. The rhythm of rebuilding became my armor. Every day I woke up before dawn, not because I had to, but because the silence of morning gave me space to think, space I hadn't realized I'd been denied for so many years. My apartment was still small and cracked and lonely, but I started to feel a strange kind of ownership over that loneliness. It was mine. It wasn't forced upon me. No one else was defining my worth anymore, and that in itself was a quiet revolution. I started keeping a ledger, not of finances, but of progress. Every day I forced myself to write down one thing I'd done that proved I wasn't defeated. Some days it was as simple as finishing a design course module. Other days it was walking past a playground without breaking down. It became a record not of perfection, but of presence. I was still here. I hadn't disappeared. The freelancing work picked up slowly. I learned how to cold pitch my skills to strangers, how to accept rejection without letting it reopen old wounds. I discovered I had a knack for listening to clients, understanding their vision, and translating it into visuals they loved. I wasn't just building logos and websites. I was rebuilding myself with every file I submitted. There were setbacks, of course, clients who ghosted me after receiving drafts, days I couldn't get out of bed because the weight of everything felt insurmountable, nights when I stared at the ceiling, wondering if my kids were tucked in safe, if they asked about me, if Nathan told them stories to keep me erased. But those nights passed. They always passed. One afternoon in a coffee shop where I had borrowed internet for months, the owner approached me with a hesitant smile. She had noticed how often I worked there, how focused I was. She asked if I could help design menus and social media graphics for her growing cafe. I said yes, heart-pounding. It wasn't a massive job, but it was the first time someone had offered me work based on what they saw in me, not a referral, not a favor, just recognition. With that small project came others. Word of mouth spread. I saved every dollar I could, ate plain pasta more nights than I cared to count, and slowly built a portfolio. I stopped feeling ashamed of where I was. That apartment with its chipped walls and humming refrigerator became a war room, a sanctuary, a studio. Through the online community I had joined, I was invited to speak on a virtual panel, starting over, women reclaiming life after loss. My instinct was to say no. Who was I to speak? I hadn't won back my children. I didn't live in a house with a garden. I still cried more than I smiled some weeks. But a woman messaged me privately, saying my first post months ago had stopped her from doing something irreversible. That was enough. I said yes. I prepared for that panel like it was a trial, writing notes, pacing my floor, practicing vulnerability like it was a foreign language. When the day came, I logged in with shaking hands. I didn't perform. I told the truth. I told them I was broken but rebuilding, that I had lost everything but myself, and maybe in some twisted grace, that was the one thing I'd needed to find again. The messages afterward were overwhelming. Strangers thanking me, calling me brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt raw, but I saved every message. I printed the ones that hit hardest and taped them above my desk. They reminded me that my pain, once voiceless, had become a bridge for someone else. I found myself returning to old dreams I had long buried. Before marriage, before motherhood, before the erasure. I used to write. Stories, essays, even scripts. I began writing again, not for publication, not for money, just to hear my own voice echo back to me from the page. It felt like finding a piece of myself trapped under rubble, brushing it off, and holding it to the light. One evening, while scrolling through a legal forum I had joined out of curiosity and habit, I stumbled upon a case eerily similar to mine. A mother fighting for custody years after losing it due to manipulation and imbalance of power. She had won, not because the system had changed, but because she had changed the way she fought. Her case cited psychological manipulation, financial abuse, parental alienation, all terms I had lived but hadn't named. I printed the case, studied it, annotated it. Something inside me began to stir, not rage, not vengeance, but clarity. I realized that my story didn't have to end with survival. It could continue toward reclamation. I wasn't just alive, I was equipped. More than that, I was informed. And that, in a system built to disbelieve and dismiss women like me, was a weapon. I began documenting. Every missed visitation, every message from my children that had been blocked, every report card I never saw. I wasn't frantic or impulsive. I was methodical. I read family law in my state like a student cramming for finals. I attended webinars, reached out to advocacy groups, and found a mentor, another woman who had once been in my shoes and now worked as a legal assistant. I didn't have money for a lawyer, but I had time, grit, and growing connections. I saved everything. I prepared everything. I built a case not out of revenge, but out of necessity. My children were growing up with a version of me that wasn't real, and I owed it to them, not to fight their father, but to fight for the truth. At night, I sat with my laptop, screen glowing against the dark, typing notes, organizing evidence, reading until my eyes burned. And sometimes I still cried. But those tears were different now. They weren't from hopelessness. They were from the sheer, overwhelming power of realizing that I was no longer waiting for someone else to fix my life. I was fixing it. Power didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived in whispers, in choices, in saying yes when I wanted to say no, in showing up when I wanted to disappear, in choosing to rebuild when destruction would have been easier. And every time I chose to rise, the girl who had walked out of that courtroom empty-handed took another step toward being whole. Took my power back. The months that followed my decision to act were some of the most sobering of my life. It wasn't just about planning anymore. It was about carrying the weight of a future I had promised myself, even if no one else had. I no longer moved through life as a victim of circumstance. I moved like a woman with a mission. I began waking up with more clarity than anxiety, driven not by revenge but by the pull of justice, justice for myself and for the truth I had been forced to bury. My apartment slowly transformed. The walls that once echoed with emptiness were now lined with index cards of legal statutes, printed screenshots, dates, and timelines meticulously arranged. My desk overflowed with files and notebooks. A corkboard above it held a calendar of deadlines, call schedules, and reminders in bold marker. Focus on the facts. You deserve to be heard. It didn't feel obsessive. It felt sacred. I also started to take care of myself in ways that weren't about appearance but function. I slept better. I cooked real meals. I went for walks not to escape but to gather strength. I knew that when the time came to face Nathan again, I couldn't look like a shattered relic of who I used to be. I had to stand in that courtroom and make them see a woman who had not only survived, but evolved. But rebuilding is never linear. There were moments when doubt clawed at my spine, especially when I saw social media updates of my children. Pictures I wasn't sent, holidays I wasn't invited to, milestones missed. Nathan's curated version of fatherhood looked flawless online. And yet I knew the reality, the ways he twisted words, suppressed contact, shaped narratives where I didn't exist. Every lie told was like a silent brick in the wall he built between me and my kids. My mentor helped me craft an affidavit that laid out the years of neglect, manipulation, and alienation with precision. She taught me how to cite without emotion, how to present facts instead of pleas. She reminded me that judges didn't care about heartbreak, they cared about patterns. So I built patterns. I highlighted inconsistencies in Nathan's communications, documented missed visitation arrangements, saved texts that contradicted his legal statements. And then came the moment I never expected, an opportunity to apply for a nonprofit grant supporting pro-se litigants in family court. I submitted my application with trembling hands, detailing my situation, my research, and my intent. 2 weeks later, I received confirmation. I had been selected. I would have access to legal support, document review, and even court prep training. For the first time in years, a door didn't slam shut. It opened. I cried the night I got that email, not because of fear, but because I had done something I never thought I could. I had advocated for myself, and someone had listened. It was validation not from a man, not from a judge, but from a system I had thought was built to ignore women like me. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The court date was set, 6 weeks away. It felt like a deadline etched in stone. Every day leading up to it became a mix of grit and trembling resolve. I practiced my statements. I rehearsed objections. I sat with my mentor in late-night Zoom calls going over case law and family dynamics. And in between those hours, I still worked. I still designed. I still showed up for clients who had no idea that their websites were being built by a woman fighting for her children. I told very few people about the court date, not because I feared failure, but because I needed this victory to be mine. I wasn't looking for applause. I was reaching for a kind of closure that applause couldn't offer. I wanted my children to see that I had never left them. I had been here all along, building a bridge back to them, one silent act of resilience at a time. The morning of the hearing, I wore a navy suit I had borrowed from a neighbor. I hadn't worn something that formal in years. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who had once been erased by a gavel. I saw someone formidable. Someone who had stitched herself back together not because she was told to, but because she refused to remain undone. Standing in that courtroom again was surreal. The same judge presided. Nathan stood across the aisle, his expression unreadable. His lawyer was present, of course, confident, composed. But I wasn't rattled, not this time, because I wasn't pleading for sympathy. I was presenting truth. I spoke clearly, not loudly. I outlined the events of the past 3 years. I provided timestamps, referenced reports, demonstrated the emotional inconsistency and strategic manipulation in Nathan's conduct. I didn't once raise my voice or let it shake. I let the documentation speak for itself. When Nathan's lawyer tried to discredit my arguments by pointing to my past financial instability, I calmly referenced my current standing, my certifications, and my support network. The judge listened. More than that, he asked questions, clarified points, took notes. That alone felt like a kind of redemption, to be taken seriously, not dismissed. When the hearing adjourned for the day, I walked out not triumphant, but whole. I had shown up. I had told my story. The rest would be decided soon, but I had already reclaimed something far greater than any verdict. That evening I sat by the window of my apartment, watching city lights flicker like quiet witnesses. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't call anyone. I just sat with myself, hands folded, feeling the steady thump of a heart that had once been shattered and was now beating with calm clarity. I didn't know what the judge's decision would be, but I knew this. I had become a woman who could fight without venom, speak without begging, and rise without needing anyone to catch her. The courtroom had taken so much from me once, but this time I had walked in not with fear, but with fire. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the shift, not in the world, but within me. Power wasn't something I had to take back anymore. It had been inside me all along. I had just learned how to use it. The days after the hearing moved with a strange stillness, as though the world around me was holding its breath. I had spent so long bracing for impact that when the moment finally passed, I didn't know how to exhale. I walked through each day suspended between hope and dread. While waiting for the judge's decision, I focused on everything I could control. I took on more clients, refined my workflow, even mentored a younger woman just starting out in freelance design. Sharing what I had learned about business, about resilience, about systems built to fail women like us, became a form of healing. Every email I sent, every project I finished, every piece of advice I offered was a stitch in the tapestry of my restoration. But beneath that calm productivity was a trembling thread of anticipation. I checked the mailbox with a silent prayer every morning. I kept my phone charged at all times, and then one afternoon the envelope came. It was heavier than I expected. My hands shook as I slid the papers out, eyes scanning for a sign, anything that would signal the outcome. And there it was. The judge had ruled in my favor for joint custody, with provisions for future sole custody if Nathan failed to meet specific standards outlined in the ruling. I sat down on the floor, the papers spread before me like scripture. My body folded inward, forehead to knees, tears streaming in silence. I didn't sob or scream. I simply wept. For the girl I had been, for the woman I had become, and for the mother I could finally be again. I whispered over and over, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure if I was thanking the universe, the judge, or the version of me who had refused to disappear. Seeing my children again after years of sanctioned absence was not cinematic. It was awkward, stiff, painful. My daughter clung to her backpack like a shield. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. Nathan had done his work well, erasure masked as protection, distortion wrapped in paternal concern. But I didn't push. I didn't cry in front of them or reach too far too fast. I simply sat on the living room floor with a puzzle box and said, "I'll be here as long as you want." We built the picture in silence, piece by piece. And when the final tile clicked into place, my son finally looked up and said, "I remember this." I nodded. So did I. We started from there. Short visits became overnight stays. Overnight stays became weekends. I kept everything consistent. Same bedtime stories, same snacks in the pantry, same lullabies hummed softly while brushing their hair. Slowly, the shadows began to lift. My daughter started bringing me drawings. My son asked if he could show me his science project. I became more than a memory. I became a presence again. But healing them meant continuing to heal myself. I sought therapy, not just for the trauma, but for the anger that sometimes still bubbled up uninvited. I needed to be the safest space my children could return to, not a battlefield for the past. I learned how to listen with patience, how to offer love without expecting immediate return, how to parent without leaning on guilt. The judge's provisions also included mandatory counseling for Nathan and scheduled parental evaluations. At first, he raged. He sent messages filled with venom, accusing me of manipulation, betrayal, and even insanity. But I didn't respond. I saved every word, sent them to the appointed family coordinator, and let the system hold him accountable. I had already fought my war. Now I was enforcing peace. In the months that followed, Nathan began to falter. Missed appointments, rescheduled visits, a growing trail of noncompliance. The very patterns I had once lived under now became visible to the court. I didn't celebrate his failures, but I documented them. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was building a life where truth, not manipulation, defined what was best for our children. One evening after tucking the kids into bed, I stepped out onto the small balcony of our new apartment. It wasn't large, but it had a view of the park where we had once spent weekends as a family. I could see the tops of trees swaying gently in the wind, their leaves shimmering gold under streetlights. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, not because I had everything back, but because I had everything I needed. My career had blossomed in parallel. The same resilience that fueled my personal fight had translated into a professional reputation I was proud of. Clients began referring me to others. I was invited to speak at a local conference on women in tech. I used my story not as a badge of survival, but as a blueprint for reinvention. I told audiences that starting over was not failure, it was proof of evolution. And still, the most important victories came in whispers. The first time my daughter asked if she could call me Mom again. The morning my son slipped his hand into mine while crossing the street. The quiet, "I love you," said not out of obligation, but out of reawakened connection. These moments, fragile and hard won, mattered more than any court ruling. There were hard days, of course, memories I couldn't erase. Questions my children asked that I didn't always know how to answer. But we faced them together. I never pretended to be perfect. I just promised never to leave again, not in presence, not in truth, and not in love. And so life took on a new rhythm, not the rhythm of survival, but of restoration. We celebrated small wins, a good report card, a joke shared over breakfast, an evening where laughter outweighed silence. We were building a new history, one gentle day at a time. Sometimes I still wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, mind flashing back to the courtroom, the years of exile, the nights spent on cold floors. But those memories no longer own me. They are echoes. I acknowledge them, and then I return to the present, to the home filled with warmth, to the children sleeping peacefully, to the woman in the mirror who no longer hides from her reflection. I had once believed that power was something external, something taken from me. But now I know the truth. Power is presence. Power is truth spoken even when no one listens. Power is rising not just once, but every time you're knocked down. Power is love that endures, rebuilds, and outlasts even the deepest betrayal. And I had taken my power back, not through force, but through patience, through proof, and through the unshakable belief that I deserved a life of dignity, peace, and wholeness. No one had handed it to me. I had claimed it piece by fragile piece, and I would never let it go again. The months that followed the final custody ruling brought a quiet kind of peace I hadn't known in years. My children began to thrive in ways I hadn't dared to hope for. My son, once reserved and hesitant around me, opened up slowly like a flower in a cautious spring. He began to share his thoughts, his fears, his ideas. My daughter, full of fierce energy, leaned into our new normal with surprising ease, often declaring our little apartment her favorite place in the world. Our routines became sacred. We cooked together in the evenings, even when all we had was rice and vegetables. We lit candles at dinner not for ambience, but because it made the kids feel like our lives were special. We held Friday movie nights on the old couch, all three of us tangled in mismatched blankets, eating popcorn out of a salad bowl because we never had the right one for snacks. And through it all, I could feel the fractures healing, not erasing, but mending. Work was thriving too. I landed a contract with a nonprofit organization that created educational content for single mothers returning to the workforce. It wasn't just fulfilling work, it was personal. I poured myself into it, creating designs that felt honest, raw, encouraging. I also began hosting small virtual workshops for women looking to pivot careers, most of whom had stories not unlike mine. There were still reminders, of course. Birthdays and holidays brought their own ache, the absence of shared traditions, the uncertainty in my children's eyes when trying to juggle between two households. I worked hard to make new memories without bitterness. On my son's birthday, instead of asking what he wanted, I asked what he wanted to remember. His answer was simple, just us, laughing. So we did that. We baked a cake that collapsed in the middle. We sang off-key. We told stories about when they were babies and they rolled their eyes but secretly loved it. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "This is what healing looks like, not perfect days, but honest ones." I found time to return to old passions. I wrote more, short essays, reflections, even fiction. I read novels again, not just articles about family law and trauma recovery. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center and learned how to shape clay, my hands stiff at first, but gradually remembering the art of softness. I had spent so long being hard in my decisions, my resolve, my defenses. And then one unexpected morning, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Nathan's sister. We had been close once before everything. She had vanished from my life during the divorce, perhaps out of fear of choosing sides. The message was short, almost hesitant. She wrote, "I've been following from a distance. I'm sorry, I see you now. Would you like to meet for coffee? No expectations, just human to human." My first instinct was to delete it, but something stopped me. Maybe because I wasn't the same woman who had walked into the courthouse years ago. Maybe because forgiveness wasn't about letting others off the hook, but about releasing myself from carrying their weight. We met at a quiet cafe. Her face had aged a little, her eyes softer than I remembered. We spoke like strangers trying to find a shared memory. She apologized, not with grand gestures, but with sincerity. She told me about the guilt she carried, the reasons she stayed away. I listened, not with judgment, but with clarity. And then I told her what she needed to hear, that I had survived, that I had forgiven, that the door wasn't wide open, but it was no longer locked. In that moment, I realized something profound. I was no longer waiting for an apology to heal. I had healed without it. Her words were a bonus, not a requirement. I left the cafe lighter. The seasons turned again, and with them my children grew taller, bolder, more themselves. I kept pace with them, not just as their mother, but as a whole person. We started a tradition of writing letters to ourselves at the end of each year, sealing them in envelopes to open 12 months later. My daughter wrote about wanting to be brave. My son wrote about wanting to build a treehouse. I wrote, "I want to love without fear, and to never forget how far we've come." Sometimes I still catch my reflection in shop windows and barely recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looks unfamiliar, but because she looks free. Her posture isn't hunched with shame. Her eyes are not scanning for danger. She walks like she belongs because she does. Power, I had learned, was not loud. It wasn't always about court victories or public recognition. Sometimes it was found in the smallest things, in making pancakes without crying, in telling your child you were wrong and meaning it, in sleeping through the night without dreams that left you breathless. I had once believed my story ended with loss, but it didn't. Loss was just the turning point, the middle chapter, the moment the heroine stops being saved and learns to save herself. And that chapter was still being written. Not long ago, my son asked me why I never gave up. We were driving home from soccer practice, the sky painted in watercolor clouds. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Because I love you, and because I remembered who I was before everything broke, and I knew I owed it to myself to meet her again." He didn't say anything. He just reached over and held my hand. No speech, no applause, just the quiet understanding that everything I had lost had led me here, to this moment, this road, this hand in mine. And I wouldn't change a thing. There's a silence that comes when the fight is over, not the absence of noise, but the absence of chaos. It's in the stillness of early mornings, when the sun filters in through half-drawn curtains and nothing aches, nothing burns. That's how I started to know I had truly taken my power back, not in some loud, defiant gesture, but in these quiet, ordinary moments where I no longer needed to brace myself. For the first time in years, my life didn't feel like something I was surviving. It felt like something I was living, fully, fiercely, and on my own terms. One of the most unexpected realizations was that I no longer needed to define myself in relation to Nathan. For so long, he had been the axis around which my life turned, first as a partner, then as a nemesis, and always as a looming presence I had to respond to. But now, his name barely passed through my mind. He had become a detail in my story, not the plot. And the more I detached from him emotionally, the more I reattached to myself. I started exploring what joy felt like, real joy, the kind that isn't tied to approval or performance. I took weekend trips with the kids to small towns and quiet lakes, places where we could be unknown and undisturbed. I painted again even though I wasn't particularly good at it. I danced in the kitchen while cooking, sang off-key in the car, and learned how to rest without guilt. That last one was the hardest. Rest had always felt like laziness, like a lapse in vigilance. I also began mentoring younger women still in the thick of it. Some were just starting their divorce process. Some were lost in the middle. Others were where I had been a few years ago, numb, flattened, unable to see anything but rubble. I didn't offer them promises, just presence. I told them the truth, that healing wasn't linear, that there would be nights they'd feel like they were drowning and mornings they'd wake up a little braver. These women helped me as much as I helped them. Every time I shared my story, it shed another layer of shame I didn't even realize I still carried. Every time I listened to someone else's pain, it reminded me of my own resilience. We were building something together, not a support group, but a movement. A quiet, powerful movement of women reclaiming their voices. In the spring, I was invited to speak at a local women's summit, just a 10-minute slot. I almost said no. Part of me still flinched at the idea of being seen too clearly, but the thought of turning down an opportunity to speak directly to women like me, it didn't sit right. I stood on that stage, palms sweating, heart hammering, and told the truth. Not the polished version, not the one I used in interviews or essays, but the raw truth, that I had been broken, abandoned, manipulated, that I had lost everything I thought defined me. That I had crawled out of that darkness not because I was exceptional, but because I refused to stay there. When I stepped down, I didn't remember half of what I had said, but I remembered the standing ovation, not because I needed the applause, but because I could see in the faces of the women standing that they saw themselves in me, that they were standing for their own battles, too. That night I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of release. I had carried so much for so long, and now it was finally off my shoulders. My past didn't own me anymore. It had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define me. There were still moments of reckoning. Sometimes I'd catch a scent that reminded me of my old house. Sometimes I'd hear a song and remember a night I had wanted to forget. But instead of crumbling, I'd breathe through it. I'd remind myself, I am here now, I am safe, I am free. And then there was the garden. I had never been a gardener. I'd always killed houseplants, overwatered herbs, forgotten to prune anything. But something about working with the earth felt necessary now. So I rented a small community plot and began learning. Tomatoes, basil, lavender, kale. I watched life grow slowly, messily, just as I had. There was something deeply spiritual about it. The dirt under my nails, the sunburn on my neck. The way seeds trusted the dark and then, without question, reached for the light. I found metaphors in everything. Healing is like weeding, you don't yank everything out at once. You have to go gently, find the roots, be patient. And sometimes, no matter what you do, things wilt. That doesn't mean you failed, it means you try again. The garden became my refuge. On days when anxiety visited like an old ghost, I'd walk barefoot in the soil and let the earth remind me, you are grounded, you belong, you are growing. One afternoon, while my daughter was painting a birdhouse nearby and my son was reading under a tree, I sat among the rows and realized something astonishing. I was happy. Not just content, not just okay, but truly, quietly, deeply happy. I hadn't thought that was possible again, not after everything that had been taken from me. But the truth was I had taken more back than I ever lost. I had taken back my self-worth, my peace, my future. I had taken back motherhood, womanhood, and the sacred right to live a life not ruled by fear. I had taken back my power. And maybe most miraculously, I had done it without losing my softness, without becoming bitter or cruel. I still believed in love, not just romantic love, but love in all its forms. The love between parent and child, the love between friends, the love of self that anchors you when the world shakes. I didn't need a partner to feel whole. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worthy. I had written those truths in the soil, in the lines of my hands, in the laughter of my children. And if you asked me now who I am, I wouldn't say survivor first. I would say I am a builder, a mother, a woman who rewrote her ending, a woman who found her power not in rage, but in rootedness. I wake up early every morning, brew my tea, sit by the window and watch the light change. I think of the woman I used to be, the one sobbing on the floor, clutching court papers, and wondering if she'd ever be okay. If I could reach back through time, I'd hold her. I'd whisper in her ear, one day you'll feel sunlight again. One day you'll laugh with your children and it won't feel stolen. One day you'll plant things and they'll grow. And she'd look at me with disbelief. But I'd hold her gaze and say, it gets better, not because someone saves you, but because you save yourself. And that, I now know, is the truest kind of power. Would you like a closing summary or a short epilogue to wrap up the full 6-part journey?